Good morning, YouTubers and art students. Today, I wanted to introduce to you pens, art pens. I absolutely love different kinds of pens, and it's so hard for me to resist buying a new pen. So maybe I'll give you a couple things to think about when you're using a pen for art, and help you decide which one actually works for you. Okay, boys and girls, here's how we're going to lay this out. Let's start with the cheapest and most common pens and work our way to the more artistic and a little bit more expensive pens. This half of the pens that I'm going to show you, a lot of them use ink that's messier, it's harder to clean up, and the inks are a little more expensive. So that might be a little more for the older students and the more advanced. Just keep in mind that the paper you use is super important. If you're using printer paper, which is probably the most common paper, keep in mind that here you go, Noah, that printer paper is going to act different than the mixed media paper that can absorb ink better. The first pen we're going to look at is a ballpoint pen, okay? These are both kind of cheaper pens. You can buy a huge pack of them. The problem with ballpoint pens is they can have ink globs coming out. They indent the paper, so they can't be, they can't be erased. They smear with your finger, or if your hand rubs on them sometimes, and you cannot draw ballpoint pens on top of colored pencils. So a lot of times, that's why artists don't really use these. They're not very accurate. They're kind of smeary. So what a lot of artists will use are Sharpies. A lot of the cheaper artworks. Oh my goodness. I just shot one across the room. So with the one I shot across the room, I'll have to show you here. That was really funny. Okay, the one I shot across the room was a fine point Sharpie. These fine point Sharpies are the most common ones used, but the fine point Sharpies, no, you've used these before, right? The problem with these, you can draw some on there if you want, they leak through your paper, and they get on, Noah knows that they get on tabletops in the kitchen, all right, and in the bathroom countertops. So I don't recommend you using those thicker Sharpies. They're called fine point, they're not actually fine point. The ones that have, the Sharpies that have the fine point on the one tip and the ultra fine point on the other, I really don't like those in my classroom because one side always runs out before the other side of the pen. I never get those anymore because they have less ink, I believe, than the rest of the Sharpie pens. So I recommend just getting these ultra fine point pens. If you can get me something for my classroom as a parent, that's what I would recommend. Ultra fine points. They're great. The one thing a couple things I don't like about these ultra fine point pens is if you hold them in one spot, they bleed everywhere. Which means they go through the paper. They also feather out, which means the ink goes outward and makes kind of choppy lines. The other thing I really don't like about these with students that are younger is that the tip is felt and they break the tip off all the time. Even adults break them off sometimes. So a lot of times I'll find these broken in my room. So those are my favorite, these Sharpie Ultra fine point pens. But what I don't like about them is what I just said. These are comparable to those ultra fine point pens. The difference is you can see that this end is black and this end is not black. If you can find these, I can't find these very many places, I would get them. They're called Nalgene lab markers. And it says on here, permanent waterproof, marks plastic, glass, and metal, not for paper. But when I use it on paper, and it doesn't really leak through compared to the Sharpie. It won't ruin a two-sided picture. If you're doing pictures in your sketchbook, and here, do this one up, and you flip the page to the back, you won't have it leaking through and ruining the picture on the back of your artwork. Okay? So that one I highly recommend, an Nalgene lab marker. Okay, moving on to my art liners. You'll notice that I have lots of this one type of pen. They're called the micron pens. Oh, before I move on to that, this pen right here is also a Sharpie pen. It was given to me as a gift by my mom. It is supposed to be a Sharpie that is no leak, a no leak Sharpie. It does not leak through. Although the ink comes out gray, just so you know, and it does leak through a little bit. So it's not perfect. It looks really elegant. It's more for a business person than an artist because it is gray ink. And it does, I bet you if I added a water test to it, I bet you it does bleed. It does bleed, yes. So it will bleed out. Okay, moving on. So take a look at these. These are called art drawing pens or multi-liner pens or things like that. With these multi-liner pens, these are what most artists use. They compare these all the time. They compare Micron to Copic. I have a Copic multi-liner, to Sakura, which I have right here, to this is actually Sakura Micro Perm, because the Microns are Sakura also, to a Statler. I've compared them all, and I have this one, which is called a Pentel Finito. Trying to be in the market is the same market as the multi-liners. I like the Microns the best, and I'll tell you why. I like the ink seems to be darker than some of the other competition. If you want to do comic books, if you take a look here, this is what comic book artists use to get a variation of lines, thick and skinny lines. If I'd recommend that you pick one out of all these, it would be the 05 or the 03. The 05 is the biggest one on here. And if you learn how to use it correctly, you can get skinny and big lines. I love that pen. It's great. I use it all the time for artworks. I kind of gravitate towards the 05 and the 03. I love the Micron 005, so be careful not to confuse the Micron 05, which is a big lead or a big ink, to the Micron 005, which is very small and sensitive. If I had a student use one of my Micron 005s, they would destroy it. I had an adult, a couple teacher friends messing with my pens, and they broke the tips off the pens. And a pack of these is about 20 bucks. So you don't really want people breaking the tips. That's the reason I have the tape on there. This is a little tip for you guys that have art pens. That tells me the year I bought it. So this is my oldest one. This one I use the most, and it's running out of ink. So this one can probably be thrown away now. Okay, let me show you another pen. These felt tip pens are usually my least favorite. I don't like felt tips with kids, and I don't like felt tips for myself because I typically use the tip too much, and then it ruins the tip very quickly. I mean, not even within 1 or 2 artworks, your pen is ruined. What I do like for felt tip pens, these are one of my all-time favorite pens now. I recommend them highly. Out of all the pens on here, these are my favorites. The Tombow, the rest is in Japanese, so I couldn't tell you what it says. It's called the Tombow Calligraphy Pen WSBH 150. I love this. This is what I use to illustrate my book. Now there's a blue, navy blue, and there's a brown or greenish black color one, like a greenish black. The greenish black one is different. It has a softer tip, and it's fun to play with it first, but unless you're really careful, this one, you can ruin the tip on. Here, go ahead and try it out now. And it also, you don't really want to use the tip, you want to use the side of it more. So that one's too soft to really always get accurate drawings. This one right here, the dark blue one, is awesome for getting a variation in line and getting fine point lines. These brush pens are used by a lot of Japanese artists for a lot of comic book, usually the black and white comics. And the most common pens I bought, the ones that were recommended online. This one, the tip is too small. This one is awesome. You can refill it, but it seems to run out of ink for me. These brush pens are exactly that. They're a pen with a brush on the tip that is filled with ink. Okay? So Noah, do you want to try a brush pen? And see what it's like. See how it's like a brush. It's also a pen. It's very hard when you're trying to draw lettering with that, or words. Brush pens are great for people who are very bold. But if you take a look, they are permanent also. The ink, if it's dry, it's permanent. If it's wet, take a look. On this paper, it bleeds. So you can do some really cool blending and shading with these pens. That's the only art tool you would need, is just one of those brush pens. I also have brush pens that are filled with water, and these are awesome on the go. This is what I would carry with me almost everywhere. And I like the flat brush pen because it has the most water in the handle and has the most that comes out. Moving on, my last couple things. I know I'm going quick here. Fountain pens, are these for you? Well, let me show you this. I've always had a struggle with fountain pens, and I've always loved them. And I've always loved these calligraphy pens. When you use calligraphy pens, the problem I have is they are the best, darkest ink of any of the pens on here. The most professional looking. This is what Charlie Brown and all the old comic books or comic strips and old comic books were written with, were these old calligraphy pens, right? Quill pens. Well, left-handed people have a really hard time with this because their hand slides this way as they draw. Well, the problem with this ink is it takes like 15 to 20 minutes to dry. So when you're using it, it doesn't really, your hand smears it. If you're right-handed, you might be able to work this out. So I've tried different things, like I've tried buying these that kind of go at an angle so your hand doesn't go on top of the ink, but then I can't get them inside my quill jar. I've also done this. I don't recommend this. I don't recommend taking a $40 paintbrush and cutting the end off and turning it into a calligraphy pen, but that's something I've done. They're tricky because you always have to pull towards yourself. I'll just write C pen because if you push forward, you can see it clips into the paper a little bit. I love calligraphy pens. They're great if you love watercolor. That's what I would use a calligraphy pen for. Or if you like pen and ink like this, we can do more lessons on that another time. And if you like different varieties of colors, you can get any color of ink and change them out. You can even paint your watercolor paint on top of your calligraphy pen, on top of the nib, and use any color you want to draw your words, letters, and pictures. These pens are called parallel pens. So I'll give you one of these now. These are awesome if you really like to draw architecture. They are a flat nib. I'll draw what it looks like here. The tip, there's different varieties of tips, but the tip is two pieces of metal sandwiched together, and the ink comes out of the tip. You can use the corner of it and get a really fine line, and you can use the flat part of it and get a really thick line. It makes it super easy to draw straight lines. Okay? So with kids, it's easy because Noah can push as hard as you want. He's not ruining the tip of it like you would on a felt tip. I like these, but you do have to fill them with ink. It is messier. The ink absorbs pretty quickly in the printer paper, but on Canson mixed media paper, it doesn't soak in as quickly. So it gives you a little time to actually do some shading with it, this is one of my favorite inks. It's called Ancient Copper. It's great for journaling. And it's great for people who are on the go. I love these parallel pens. They are a little bit rough. They can scratch a hole through your paper if you press too hard on this printer paper. But what I did is I sanded the tips of them with a piece of sandpaper, just a tiny bit, and it took the edge off of how sharp they were on the corners. And the last thing, and that's basically it for that. How do you like that parallel pen, Noah?
It's probably one of my favorites.
Is it?
Mm-hmm.
Let's add some water to your ink. It's black ink, okay. Yeah, those are pretty cool because the ink doesn't run out very quickly either. I also have a couple more fountain pens to share with you. Another get a thick line and skinny line, and they're just like a calligraphy pen, only they are filled with ink. Awesome pen. It's an antique though. I'm afraid to lose that pen. I spent probably $100 on this. It's probably worth $300 because it's an antique. And you can decide which of these pens is the best choice for you. And then show me some of your artworks. Once you use your favorite pen, show me some of the artworks you've done with them. Talk to you guys later. Have a good week.